The government versus the RBA. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainsley Insights, brought to you by Ainsley Bullion, Ainsley Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainsley Group celebrates 50 years. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been deciphering the blame game between the government and the RBA when it comes to our falling levels of disposable income. How are you going today, Alex?
I am going better than Chalmers.
Better than Chalmers. We were talking just before this. He's had some interesting statements, which we'll get to a little bit later. But let's start off the big picture. When you were looking at that today in the article, this blame game's been going on, and it has been for quite a while. The public even blaming the RBA. We've had rising mortgage rates. It's their fault. It's their fault. That's not really how you see it, though, is it?
No, I think I had two or three people yesterday tell me that the RBA is terrible and they're doing it tough because of interest rates. And I'm in Bullock's corner. She's got nowhere to go. And she has been told she needs to get inflation to 2 to 3%. Inflation last came in at around 3.5%. Add back in what the government gave back in the energy rebate, which she's asked to look at not stripping out and get the ABS to look into that. We're actually still at 4. There is nothing she can do. We have not been at 2 since March 2021. So it got up to 7, 8% at certain points. It came back down a bit to maybe 3.5%. And it's staying there. It has not been pulled back down enough, and it is her job to make sure that Australia is financially stable, as well as making sure we have employment and other things. But her main goal is 2 to 3%, and so people need to stop blaming her. We can go into in a minute where the inflation is actually coming from, and she has pointed that out over and over and over again, and now that person would like to blame her. And I'm in her corner.
It would be an extremely tough job. And I think, and you highlight that in the article, and certainly when we've been talking, that maybe people are waking up to that it's not really RBA's fault in this particular situation. But before we get to that, you mentioned this term bracket creep, and I just wanted to touch on that for a little bit, because specifically when you were talking about disposable income, that's what everyone's been feeling, that they really don't have any left. There's nothing left when you cover all your bills. You're out. So I thought that was an interesting one just to retouch on again, bracket creep, and how that's impacted why people are feeling that way.
Yeah, so that was raised this week. So Chalmers has come in and sort of been saying that a lot of the... Okay, so let's start again. Discretionary spending has fallen 6.1% in Australia, the worst in the developed world. So we are going backwards at a rate of 6% per year in what we have available to spend. So to say that that is hurting someone's hip pocket would be an understatement. People are doing it extremely tough. And in response to that, Chalmers came out and had a swipe at the RBA and said it's because they're holding interest rates too high. So a lot of people have come out in defence of the RBA. One of those is an economist by the name of Warren Hogan, who works for Judo Bank, who basically said not the RBA's fault. There's a range of reasons. Migration is one of them, but one of the main culprits is this bracket creep, which is if we've got inflation at 7% and you don't lift your tax brackets by 7%, then you get taxed more on what you're earning. So even if you were to have gotten a pay rise, I think the average pay rises were 2-3%. They weren't huge. With inflation, you've gone backwards 4%. With bracket creep, it's worse because on your 4%, you're still taxed at the rates that you were when there wasn't inflation there. So what he's saying is that that's cost the consumers $50 billion over 2 years. And even these lovely tax cuts that the governments have given us recently are a bit of a slap in the face, because even this year they gave us back 25 billion and they took 31 billion equivalent in tax creep. So none of it is inflation driven by migration. It is inflation driven by government spending, and the government is funding its government spending by taking more share of tax. The consumers are bleeding.
And all of that, everything you've just said there, as you rightly pointed out earlier, doesn't really fall on Michelle Bullock's shoulders, right? Like as as the RBA chair, she's trying to navigate that against that background. It must be extremely challenging on her leadership of that position when you've got really the government not helping you out there when you're really probably supposed to be working together a little bit at least.
Yeah, I believe it was a statement last month or the month before where she said if government spending doesn't drop, we can't, we're not going to drop rates. And she's sort of saying December at the earliest if government starts moderating things. Well, they're not. So, they're not, these interest rates, unlike the UK, the US and Europe right now, whose inflation has started moderating, Australia's has not to the same level.
And do you think there is going to be political pressure? Do you think the elections that, increasingly our elections are coming up as well, are they going to play a role in shaping this a little bit? Has the public figured this out yet? Or are we still really believing the stories that are coming out of the government that it is the RBA's fault? How do you view that?
Well, I mean, when people spoke to me yesterday about it being the RBA's fault, when I pointed out it's not, people know that. It's just the RBA bit is what hits them. So I actually think, yes, people are starting to work out that this is not the RBA. The inflation figure, the GDP figure came in today, which was after the article was written at 0.2%, which is what everyone was predicting why Chalmers was attacking the RBA, because he knew how weak this GDP figure was going to be. 0.2% with government spending adding 1.2% to GDP means that we're not just in a GDP recession. The private sector of the economy is in a recession. If you strip out government spending, we are currently in a recession. There is no other way to look at this. Chalmers needed a scapegoat. He chose the RBA. There were a lot of commentators this week that came to Bullock's defence, which is great because people need to know where this lies. And interestingly, Chalmers' comment after the GDP figure was not to attack the RBA. So I think he learnt not to bite that hand anymore. He actually, though, came out ironically and said, consumption went backwards and discretionary spending fell substantially. Without government spending growth, there would be no growth in the economy at all. Can we just talk about how about perhaps if you gave people some money and stop spending money on God knows what anymore? Like, what does a government need to keep spending money on? I've heard stories. I fully support the NDIS stories, but I've had friends tell me that they've been offered jobs to cook bread with people on NDIS at $50, $60 an hour. So can we talk about where this money is going and where it might do better at the moment in actual consumers' pockets rather than crazy NDIS, $500 million on the yes vote, which went nowhere. We're now talking about census, asking people what LGBTQ they are. Like, can we stop spending money on irrelevant stuff and get back to fix the economy? I'd like to add another word there, but I'll just say fix the economy.
And I think you highlight a really important point there, that ultimately it's the same money. And the concept of a capitalistic society is that you give people the money and they decide how to spend it. It's not that's how you end up with all of these different agendas receiving funding that wouldn't necessarily receive funding if it was up to individuals, because that's how free market capitalism is supposed to work. So we're certainly not heading in that direction, are we? If we've got the money being funneled through government, who then needs to spend it, and to make a statement, I mean, that's an extremely bold statement from the treasurer.
Bold.
Crazy.
Bold is not what I would say. I've run out of
word. Yeah.
I've run out of scapegoats, so I'm going to pat myself on the back. Good job. Keep spending. Keep taking the money away from people, and then work out why your inflation is rampant.
It's pretty straightforward to see that path. Is there, probably final question on this, is there any other path other than, I mean, obviously spend less. It's not rocket science there, what you're saying, but is there anything specifically that needs to be done beyond that? Is it, giving the money back to people to let them decide? What's your big picture, couple of line solution to this problem if you were running for government, if you were in that position?
So over in the US at the moment, you've got Trump talking about putting someone in charge of getting rid of red tape, and it's been proposed Elon Musk, which considering the number
Department of Government Efficiency, I think the
DOGE,
Department,
Department of Government Efficiency, yes. So he's been proposed to do that. Look, if you do tax cuts right now with inflation where it is, it's going to create more inflation. The only thing that could possibly happen right now is initially we have a little bit of pain, the government cuts its expenditure, and then the government gives some tax back and actually becomes more efficient rather than running up its spending at 6% per annum. If you want GDP or inflation at 2 to 3%, then government spending should only be going up at 2 to 3%. And in fact, industry is required to become more and more efficient. So should the government. So it should be running at 1 to 2%. So if they cannot manage that, then this will continue. And the consumer is going to be further squeezed because they do need to give tax cuts, but they cannot do it unless they stop spending.
Well, as always, lots of valuable insight there, Alex. And I know I always appreciate these discussions. I know our audience does as well. So thank you for your work on that and your solutions that you're providing, as you always do. So thanks for that.
Oh, always happy to provide solutions to walls.
Very much the case. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll chat again soon.